Well, Corruption Watch is calling for transparency in this matter. Its Executive Director, David Lewis, is joining us now in the studio. Mr. Lewis, good morning and thank you very much. You were one of those organizations a few months ago, some time back, who really raised the question about the deal between MultiChoice and NN7 after it came to light through the Gupta leaks that there's been all kinds of payments made that seemed unusual. Now, MultiChoice coming out yesterday saying that a committee was set up to investigate this and that as far as they could see, and they concluded there was nothing unusual in the payments that were made, and everything's normal, no corruption, nothing illegal. What's your response? What's your overriding response to MultiChoice's statement yesterday?
Well, I watched the news briefing yesterday, the media briefing yesterday. I don't think that they've been very persuasive. It reminds me a bit of the 5 stages of grief. First you deny it, nobody accepts your denial, then you get very angry, then you start bargaining, and I think they're in the bargaining stage now. We'll concede some things and we'll admit contrition, but there are not sufficient answers. And I think that, firstly, they've commissioned 2 reports, and I think those reports should be made public. I think the one was from a law firm, the other from an auditing firm.
That's why you're calling for transparency.
Yeah, I think, under the circumstances, there may be commercial confidentiality issues, but they can somehow redact those, or frankly ignore them. But I think that these should be made public. There was one other thing yesterday, a seemingly small point, but one of the journalists asked is, why was Imtiaz Patel not in at the briefing? He is the CEO of MultiChoice. It was said that it was because he was not responsible directly for the South African operations, but he was the one in that critical meeting with the SABC, and he should have been there to answer for himself. I mean, he was the one capable of giving direct evidence. And the final thing is that the Guptas have adopted a particular modus operandi in the state capture modality, and that is of inserting the private company that wants something out of government, inserting another company between that private company and the government decision maker. And in this instance, just as in the McKinsey case, it was Trillion, in the Neotel case, it was Homix. Was the company in this instance ANN7, or maybe even the SABC, that both received, or certainly in ANN7's case, received large payments that are not entirely explained yet, as was clear in the meeting. And what was done with those payments? It certainly wasn't to produce a quality TV station. There's no question about that.
On the face of it, I mean, I've read the MultiChoice statement. I have it in my hand a couple of times. I didn't have the opportunity to watch the press briefing. And I'm looking at it, I'm saying, in terms of what they are saying here, there's nothing untoward. They say they made some procedural mistakes, but there is no corruption. The payments are nothing untoward, unusual. But then they mention something. This is the chief executive of MultiChoice, Calvo Mawela, yesterday. He mentioned something that alludes to state capture. He's saying that we entered into an agreement for the NN7 at a time that the event of state capture was unknown. Then we fully understand the outrage that has come out. So it looks to me that the real reason is that they are scared that they might be drawn into the state capture cesspool. Conceivably,
if the reason for your concern was the Gupta's ownership of the station, well, frankly, you didn't need the Gupta leaks to know that this was a very problematic owner. I think that, ANN7 was the voice of a criminal conspiracy. I don't think they were the voice of a political tendency. They were the voice of a criminal conspiracy led by the Gupta and Zuma families, and they probably remain so to this day. And, you could have known that, or had a very strong suspicion of that, at least from the wedding saga. So I don't know. I mean, that is an interesting reference.
Yeah, you asking for more transparency. If there are 2 reports, they must be known. But on the face of it, if you look at this statement, as Corruption Watch, you've raised a red flag before about this. Are you satisfied with what the MultiChoice position has done? And taking into consideration what the Editors Forum now is saying, Sanef, that we need to know really more. There's constitutionally, and ICASA Act as well speaks about a diversity of opinions on our airwaves, diversify of the airwaves, and there's a constitutional right to freedom of expression and all of that.
Well, you know, I wouldn't like to contest with Sanef on the diversity of opinion. As I said, I don't think they represented the diversity of political views. I think they represented, frankly, organized crime in the way in which they handled their job. Whether they've convincingly explained that there was no link between, that ANN7 did not constitute a link between them and the ministry, and indeed that the SABC or the selected SABC executives at the time didn't constitute a link between themselves, between MultiChoice and the ministry in pursuit of the encryption decision. I don't think that has yet been cleared up, and they will continue to be pressurized. If they think that this has been put to bed, I think that's very unlikely.
It's not over yet.
It's not over. There were some interesting things said, you know, like lobbying practices. I mean, I think we need to think very seriously as a society about how to regulate lobbying, for example. I didn't really understand the due diligence point, but it's interesting. This is exactly what the...
But they said in their statement here that they have never carried out historically. I'm just going to quickly read it just before we end this conversation. Historically, MultiChoice has not performed a due diligence test on any channel ownership. Yeah. So any of the channels that exist on the bouquet of DSTV, they never done due diligence. Why has it become now more relevant?
I don't know what due diligence they would have done. Would it have been on the background of the owners of the channel? I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that it's exactly the same as McKinsey said about Trillion. And so, you know, these big companies that are simply not used to being held to account. But this is a communications company. This is a very poor communications strategy. Why is it so? It's because they just never believe that it's their duty to account to the public who consume their services. And they'll all learn the lesson of that. I hope that they'll learn the lesson of that, because I don't think that public opinion is going to be assuaged by yesterday's performance.
Thank you very much for your views. As Corruption Watch Executive Director David Lewis. More news on the other side of the break here on Morning News Today on ENCS. Stay with us.